A pregnant widow found hope again, when the rancher offered his heart and home. The prairie stretched wide and endless, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on the sea. Clara Morgan trudged along the dusty road, clutching her small bundle of belongings against her chest. Her face, though pale with exhaustion, carried the quiet determination of a woman who refused to give up, even when life had already taken nearly everything from her. It had been 4 months since her husband, Thomas, had died in a logging accident. One moment he had been smiling at her, swinging his axe, and the next, a falling tree had crushed the life out of him. The shock had left Clara hollow, her grief sharpened by the reality that she carried his child. Alone, with no land to her name and only a few coins hidden in her apron, she had been forced to leave their small cabin. Some neighbors had shown kindness, offering meals or a night's shelter, but pity could not sustain her. Others had whispered cruelly, saying she was a burden, that she should remarry quickly or risk her child being born unwanted. Clara had refused the advances of 2 men whose eyes lingered too long on her belly and not at all on her heart. She wanted love, not possession. But most of all, she wanted safety for her child. Now, on this late autumn day, she stumbled into the small frontier town of Willow Creek, hoping for work, a place to stay, or at least a reprieve from the endless loneliness pressing down on her. The townsfolk's eyes followed her as she passed, their gazes lingering on the swell of her belly. Some looked away with sympathy, others with judgment. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, wishing she could vanish into the dust. It was then that she heard a low voice call her name. Clara! She turned and saw him, Ethan Carver. He stood tall and broad-shouldered by the hitching post outside the general store, his brown hair tousled by the wind, his weathered face tanned from years of working under the sun. His eyes, a steady gray, widened in surprise at the sight of her. Ethan, she whispered, her lips trembling. He had been a friend of Thomas's, though quieter, more reserved. She remembered him visiting their cabin a few times, bringing supplies or sharing a meal. He had always been kind, though distant, as if carrying a weight of his own. I didn't know you were still in these parts, Ethan said, stepping forward. Clara swallowed hard. I've nowhere else to go. Ethan glanced at her bundle of belongings, then at her swollen belly. A muscle worked in his jaw, but his voice remained gentle. You eaten today? She shook her head, and before she could protest, Ethan guided her into the store. He bought her bread, cheese, and a flask of milk, ignoring her murmured protests about not being able to pay him back. When she finally sat on the bench outside, nibbling the bread with trembling hands, Ethan stood nearby, arms folded, as though shielding her from the stares of others. When she finished, she dared to meet his gaze. Why are you being so kind to me? Ethan's expression softened. Because you need it. And because Thomas was my friend. Her throat tightened at the mention of her husband's name, but Ethan's voice held no pity, only quiet respect. A proposal of shelter. Over the next days, Ethan's presence in Clara's life grew. He came by the boarding house where she managed to rent a small room, leaving firewood or food at her door. He asked nothing in return, never pushed, never lingered too long. Still, Clara felt both gratitude and unease. She had learned to be wary of men's intentions, but Ethan seemed different, his kindness born not of desire but of duty, or something deeper she could not yet name. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Ethan knocked at her door. She opened it, surprised to see him holding a small basket filled with dried meat, flour, and a jar of preserves. You'll need this, he said simply. She blinked back tears. Ethan, I can't keep taking from you. I have nothing to give. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke with a quiet firmness that made her heart race. Clara, I don't help you to get something back. I help you because it's right. But, he hesitated, his gaze flicking to her belly before meeting her eyes again. A boarding house room won't be enough when the baby comes. You need more than charity. You need a home. Her breath caught. And where would I find one? He took a step closer, his voice steady, almost solemn. At my ranch. Clara's eyes widened. Ethan, I've got land, a house, plenty of room, he continued. I live alone, and truth be told, it's been a lonely life. I never married. Never found someone who'd stay. But when I saw you walk into town, Clara, his voice grew rougher. I knew. You need a safe place. And he drew in a breath. I want a family. If you'll let me, I'll give you both. Her heart pounded. She had expected kindness from Ethan, perhaps even friendship, but not this. You'd marry me? Even knowing this child isn't yours, she whispered. Ethan's gray eyes didn't waver. A child needs a father, and you need a husband who'll stand by you. I can be both. Not out of pity, Clara. Out of choice. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand to her belly, overwhelmed by the weight of his offer. Could she trust him? Could she dare to open her heart again? The choice. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the winter wind rattle the shutters. Her mind swirled with doubts. She thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared, and of the ache of losing him. Could she give her heart to another man? But then she thought of her unborn child. A child who would need a father's name, a father's arms, a home where laughter might one day echo again. And she thought of Ethan, his quiet strength, his steady kindness, his offer of hope when she had none left. By dawn, she knew her answer. A new beginning. They were married a week later in the small wooden chapel on the edge of town. The ceremony was simple, just the preacher, a handful of witnesses, and the soft glow of candlelight. Clara wore a modest dress borrowed from the boarding-house keeper, her hands trembling as she held Ethan's. When the vows were spoken and the ring slipped onto her finger, Clara felt something she hadn't in months: safety. She wasn't alone anymore. Afterward, Ethan guided her onto his wagon and drove her out to the ranch. The land stretched wide and strong, fenced pastures rolling toward distant hills. The farmhouse was simple but sturdy, with smoke curling from its chimney and a porch that looked out toward the sunset. "It's not much," Ethan said, almost apologetically as he helped her down. Clara looked at the house, at the land, and at the man standing beside her. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a glimmer of hope. "It's home," she whispered. The child. Winter deepened, and with it came both hardship and joy. Clara and Ethan settled into life together, she cooking and tending the home, he working the cattle and mending fences. He never treated her as fragile, though he was always attentive, always near when she needed him. When the pains of labor finally came, Ethan was at her side, his strong hand gripping hers through every cry, every tear. Hours later, their child was born, a boy with a shock of dark hair and a strong cry that filled the cabin. Clara wept as she cradled him, her heart overflowing. Ethan leaned close, his voice rough with emotion. "What'll we call him?" Clara looked up at him, tears shining. "Thomas, after his father. And James, after you." Ethan's throat worked as he nodded. "Thomas James Carver. He's ours now." He kissed Clara's forehead, then the baby's. And in that moment, she knew his words were true. Hope restored. The seasons turned, and with them, Clara's life blossomed anew. She grew to love Ethan, not just for his strength, but for his gentleness, his loyalty, the way he rocked the baby at night and whispered promises he thought she couldn't hear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire, Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, their child nestled in her arms. "I told you I wanted a family," he murmured softly. "Turns out, you were the missing piece all along." Clara leaned into him, her heart full. "And I found hope again, because of you." The prairie wind swept around them, no longer carrying whispers of loss, but of love, of second chances, of a future bright with promise. Clara Morgan Carver, once a grieving widow, now stood in the shelter of a man's heart and the warmth of a true home. And she knew she would never walk the road of life alone again.